Just when I thought I had made the best decision, something unexpected changed everything. I turned my back without looking, convinced that I deserved something better, someone who didn't have to hide behind a broken, hopeless image. I said goodbye with a mix of contempt and false confidence, ready to leave that grey chapter behind and begin searching among the bright lights for the life I believed I deserved. But then something happened that I never imagined. My heart raced as I watched her, that girl who, until a few minutes ago, was just a dull and faded memory, walk away. The street was empty, silence heavy, and I kept convincing myself that I had rid myself of a burden. But just as she disappeared from view, a powerful engine shattered the stillness. A luxury car, gleaming under the streetlight, stopped by her side. The door opened elegantly, and she got in without hurry, without nerves, with a confidence that sent a chill through me. I had never seen her like that. Not even in my wildest dreams did I imagine that this girl, who seemed to struggle every day, who wore worn-out clothes and avoided glances, actually led a life I could never comprehend. In that moment, all my laughter and scorn seemed absurd, ridiculous, next to the majestic scene unfolding before my eyes. Now the truth hit hard. I was not the one who chose, but the one who lost everything. I tried to get closer, to say something, but the car drove off and she disappeared into the night with a smile I had never seen before. Who was this girl, really? What had she been hiding all this time? Doubts overwhelmed me, and a heavy remorse began to erode my pride. What I thought would be an ending turned out to be just the beginning of a much more complex story, and I was about to discover that the boundaries between what we appear to be and who we really are can change in an instant, leaving a lesson I will never forget. He had always believed that love had a price, and in his mind that price was measured in bills, in visible things, in gold, silver, and flashy cars. But what he didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was about to teach him a lesson that would change everything. That afternoon, with the sun setting and the shadows lengthening, our protagonist was about to lose much more than just a girlfriend. It all began with an almost childish disdain, a contempt that sprung up because she didn't have what he considered enough. It was as if he had put on glasses that only allowed him to see price tags instead of glances, smiles, or dreams. When he saw her so simple, in her worn clothes and that old bag, he couldn't help but mock her. There wasn't a hint of compassion. "Is this what you've been with me for?" he thought, as he looked at her with that mix of arrogance and scorn. His mind couldn't help but compare her to what he believed he deserved: parties, dinners in expensive restaurants, ostentatious gifts. He couldn't stand being reminded that he wasn't in that league. So, without thinking too much, he left her there, on that corner where they had promised each other so much, like someone closing a chapter without wanting to listen anymore. But what happened next broke all his expectations. Just as he turned to walk away, she didn't fade into nothingness or fall defeated. On the contrary, something appeared that the young man could never have imagined. A luxury car, gleaming, with perfect tires and the engine purring with that force and elegance that only the most exclusive cars have. The doors opened for her, and in that instant, a different smile lit up her face. It wasn't the smile of the vulnerable girl he had scorned, but that of someone who had led a double life, someone stronger, more powerful, someone who had kept a secret that now emerged in all its glory. What followed was a whirlwind of emotions for our protagonist. The pride that until that moment had been like his shield began to break under the weight of his surprise. How easy it had been to judge without knowing. How simple her supposed poverty seemed to him when in reality she had an entire world he could never have imagined. Pride turned into a sting of regret, one that spoke to him loud and clear. He had lost someone who deserved much more than his contempt. The most unsettling part is that this revelation wasn't just a blow to his ego, but a call to rethink what the true value of a person is. Because he had confused appearance with essence, money with happiness, and now he was paying dearly for it. As the luxury car drove away with her, leaving just a barely visible flash, our young man was left with a question pierced in his chest. What would have happened if he had truly known her before judging? If he had looked beyond what his eyes could see and his ego allowed him to accept? The story is just beginning, and if there's one thing that's clear, it's that not only broken memories remained on that corner, but also a much greater mystery about who she really was and what she had been hiding all that time behind her apparent poverty. He had lost much more than a girlfriend. He'd lost the chance to discover a truth far more valuable than any bank account. And even if he tried to regret it, that moment had already been engraved, a marker in his life that would stay with him forever. This isn't just a story about love and money. It's a reflection on the value of people, the danger of appearances, and how sometimes the greatest luxury is hidden where we least expect it. Now, the question is, what will he do with this revelation? Will he try to win her back, or will he learn that some kinds of prestige cannot be bought, not even with the most expensive car? As he looks at the place where she disappeared, his mind is filled with questions that don't seem to have easy answers. But one thing is certain, that afternoon, our protagonist's world changed forever, and what comes next promises to be much more intense than any story of love with money and appearances could ever tell. Just as Saul finished uttering those sharp words, he noticed how her eyes fixed on him, trying to find a crack, some sign of weakness. But Clarissa simply stared back, without a hint of resentment, almost as if she had been expecting that contempt for a long time. He felt superior, convinced that he deserved someone with a better status, and walked out of the cafe with firm steps, leaving behind a heavy air that seemed to drag down everything they had ever built. As Saul walked down the street, every thought was dominated by inflated pride. "How could I be with someone who barely has enough to buy a coffee?" he repeated to himself, almost like a mantra affirming his decision. He imagined the expressions on his friends' faces when they found out he was now free of burdens, able to aspire to something better, someone who was really on his level. But he didn't even realize that just a few meters away, Clarissa was slowly collecting her things from the table, not rushing, not desperate. She stepped onto the sidewalk, still with that imperturbable calm that was so disconcerting. Her face showed no sorrow, nor anger, not even confusion. She simply seemed to be waiting for something, someone. Saul felt a chill down his spine when a shining shape appeared in the distance on the street, creating a stark contrast to the grey, humble surroundings he so despised. A black car, gleaming to the extreme, stopped right in front of Clarissa. The back door opened with a soft hydraulic whisper. Saul stopped dead in his tracks. That instant shattered all the assumptions he'd constructed in his mind and left an uncomfortable emptiness in his chest. Where did that car come from? Who was waiting for Clarissa in such a vehicle? Years of prejudice and social blindness seemed to crumble in seconds. A figure stepped out of the car, with elegant strides, impeccably dressed. He was a well-dressed man, but what left the biggest impression was the way he looked at Clarissa, with admiration, respect, and a hint of tenderness. Clarissa got into the car without looking back. The door closed with a definitive click, leaving Saul frozen on the sidewalk. The sound of the engine faded away, taking with it all the ideas Saul had held about who the girl he had just left really was. His pride, which had once pushed him forward, turned into a heavy knot in his throat. Now, loneliness and uncertainty seemed to be his only companions, as he watched that luxury, that life he had never even imagined, drive away with her. How could he have been so blind? Did he really think that money could define a person's worth, That question hit him with unexpected force, stirring up a tumult of emotions he didn't know how to handle. Amid this turmoil, he couldn't help but wonder what secrets Clarissa was hiding, what story lay behind that apparent humility he had dismissed so quickly. As the car turned the corner and the figure of the man disappeared in the distance, Saul was left alone with his thoughts. His world used to revolve around the superficial, but that image of the luxury car, with Clarissa inside, radiating a confidence and elegance he had never imagined, dismantled all his prejudices. For the first time, he understood that appearances don't tell the whole story, and that perhaps he had lost much more than a girlfriend. With every step he took back to his house, the echo of his words sounded hollow in his mind. "I deserve something better," he told himself. But that phrase no longer made sense. Because what if Clarissa already had something better, waiting for her all along? Who was she, really? And most unsettling of all, was there any chance he could reclaim the opportunity he'd let slip away so easily? The silence of the street that night felt like a sentence Saul was only just beginning to comprehend. Everything he had despised was now before his eyes, and all he could do was stand there, trapped in the emptiness of his own mistake. Clarissa's story was only just beginning, and Saul realized, too late, that he was not the protagonist of that story, just a spectator left behind by his past and his ignorance. Meanwhile, Clarissa steered her life with the dignity of someone who knows her own worth. What Saul didn't know was that the humble image she projected was only a refuge, a shield to protect herself from a world that often judges without listening. That night, by getting into that car, she was claiming not only her future, but also making it clear that no one would define her path. Least of all, a man incapable of looking beyond an empty pocket. However, the city's streets are not always so predictable, and what seemed a definitive end for Saul might be the beginning of a much harsher lesson. Because life has a curious way of returning everything we think we've lost, but at a cost you only understand when you face the truth. And truth sometimes hurts more when you accept it from humility rather than pride. As he thought about all this, Saul forced himself to look ahead, not knowing that behind him something was moving, something that might change the course of his story forever. That night didn't just mark the end of a relationship, but the beginning of a journey that would lead him to question who he really was and what he was willing to lose for his prejudices. But who was the man waiting for Clarissa? What secret did that luxury car hide? And most importantly, what was Clarissa expecting from all this? That mystery remained open, and like every story worth telling, it promised an unexpected ending. Saul could only imagine one thing, that maybe what he had despised was much greater than his own imagination, and that perhaps he might regret having let it go so easily. Fate, true to its game, was playing its hand now. Saul was right on the board, not knowing what piece to move or which path to take. But one thing was certain: the price of underestimating someone's value is never cheap. And when things come back, they return with force, leaving a mark impossible to ignore. In that moment, he began to understand that true wealth is not in what you possess, but in the person you choose to see. Before it's too late, he looked at her, the corner of his lips curling into a disdainful smile, and without thinking twice, he let out those words that cut deeper than a knife. "I can't be with someone who has no future. No money, nothing." She, with her eyes fixed on the ground, felt the blow of his mockery like a cold winter rain. He walked away, certain that he had made the right decision, convinced that he deserved something better, someone who didn't drag problems or shortcomings behind. But just at that moment, when her figure became small in the distance, a sound caught everyone's attention. A powerful engine roared to life, and from the street a luxury car appeared, its shine in brutal contrast with the apparent poverty he had scorned. That scene changed everything. That was the first spark that ignited a fire impossible to extinguish. A story nobody expected. From afar, the car's gleam looked like a promise, a sign that reality was much more complex than the surface that Boy had so quickly judged. But it wasn't just the car, it was what it represented. For him, that image was proof of a lie. For her, it was a secret carefully kept, a double life she had preferred to hide thus far to avoid envy or criticism. What story was behind the girl he saw as a mistake, a burden? Why had she never mentioned that side of her life? Between the rejection and this new chapter full of questions, the tension grew like a storm, ready to burst. Uncertainty returns, while the camera lingers on the boy's confused and humiliated face. Questions flutter in his mind he never knew to ask. How could he have been so blind? What had he really lost? But above all, what lies behind that closed door, which is now about to open and reveal secrets that will upend his world forever? The story does not end with his arrogant walk away, but rather just as everything is about to change. And now, let's first find out how this story began, what those days meant for both of them, days that seemed simple, but hid far more than one could imagine. The story unfolds in a city that never sleeps, where neon lights cover narrow streets and stark contrasts. There the youth try to make their way, but appearances matter more than the truth. In that context, Carla and David were a couple who met at university, between books and cheap coffee. She, with her almost always worn backpack and simple look, seemed like an ordinary girl, with no great pretensions or luxuries. He, with his brand-name clothes and confident smile, seemed to have it all figured out. But the real battles weren't visible at a glance. He saw only the image in her, and that was enough to disdain her. Yet from the first day, Carla knew her reality was different. It was not just about what she wore or her bank account, but a hidden world, of which she had barely shared a sliver. Carla avoided talking about her family, not because it was a shameful secret, but because she had learned people judge without knowing. Her father had built a business empire few could imagine. She kept it quiet, so as not to arouse suspicion or jealous looks from those who thought she took advantage. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she represented. But David couldn't see beyond her humble appearance, and focused on what he believed was a cheap excuse to justify her financial struggles. Pride clouded his vision. He wanted to display his status and feel superior. That led him to make the impulsive decision that would change everything. That day in the park, the conversation grew tense. David couldn't help but make hurtful comments disguised as jokes. Carla tried to stay strong, but sadness crept into her eyes. He stood up, turned his back, and delivered the final blow, that phrase that would be forever etched in her heart. What he didn't know was that his words had ignited a different fire, one that Maria, Carla's friend, would later describe as the first crack in the wall of his false pride. Fate had a tough lesson in store for them both. When David walked away, thinking he had won, he had actually lost the chance to really know who Carla was. At that very moment, when Carla seemed to be sinking, the black car appeared, elegant and powerful. The driver rolled down the window, and a soft but firm voice called her. The contrasting sound of the engine and the striking scene left David frozen. Who was that man? Why was he there for her? Carla smiled with a mix of pride and sadness. She was not a poor student, nor just an ordinary girl. She had kept a double life for protection, and now that world emerged, showing David that reality is always more complex than it seems. It was an unexpected twist that opened his eyes and began to dissolve his prejudices, leaving space for reflection and surprise. What would he do now? Would he have the humility to admit his mistake? Could he recover what he let go because of a misjudged image? The story was just beginning to reveal its layers. Everything pointed to the lesson being imminent, with a blow more forceful than any prior scorn. And as the camera pulls back, showing the contrast between the luxurious car and the empty sidewalk, only one question lingers in the air: who is Carla, really? And what will happen when David and she cross paths again? This mystery, full of raw emotions, is what we will now discover together, step by step, with each scene I'll reveal in the next episode. Because sometimes life teaches us that appearances are deceiving and that true value is hidden behind what we cannot see. Ready to discover it? Join me as we continue this journey that's only just beginning. I can't believe what you just did. Did you really think I'm someone who settles for less? I deserve something better, someone who can offer me a bright future, not this misery you wear as if it were a shield. Tell me, how much do you have in your account? You don't need to answer. I know it's nothing. And that's enough. Tired of the false image she projected, of the empty promises and each insecure glance, he simply turned his back and walked away from her, convinced that as soon as he closed that door, the air would be lighter and his life purer. But fate loves the cruelest ironies. He stood on the sidewalk, heart-pounding, not from pain but from a hatred hidden between his own thoughts. His steps drifted away from the girl he had loved, or so he thought, when suddenly a car appeared. Not just any car, but one that shone in the night under the streetlights, a luxury vehicle that seemed more taken from a movie than everyday reality. She walked toward that car without hesitation. Her face, to the boy who was still watching her from afar, changed. She was no longer the fragile person he had judged. That woman had something more, something he had never seen, or perhaps simply refused to see. The lights of the car reflected in her eyes, and suddenly the truth fell apart. It had never been about money. He had allowed himself to be deceived by an appearance, by a lie he'd told himself to justify his wounded ego. The car was her escape, her refuge, and above all the proof that the story he had built for her was falling to pieces. She was not the poor or insecure girl he had left behind. She was someone much more complex, someone with a whole world hidden behind that seemingly shy smile. As the engine roared and she disappeared into the night, the boy stood paralyzed, not just by surprise, but by a remorse that was growing strong. How could he have been so blind? How many times had he forgotten to really see? But this is only the beginning, because when appearances deceive, the story still has many layers to be uncovered, and he, without realizing it, is about to witness how life will show him that true wealth isn't always measured in bills or in luxurious vehicles, but in who you really are, what lies behind that facade. What secrets does this woman hold who to him was just a mistake? And more importantly, has he already lost the chance to see her as she truly is? What seemed like a simple abandonment becomes a story where tension and truth cross at every corner. In every fleeting glance, and in the decisions that will forever shape their destinies, the night moves on, and with it the answers and the doubts. What you thought you understood was only on the surface. Now get ready, because this is just beginning, and the real story is about to reveal secrets that will leave you breathless. Are you ready to find out what happens when pride meets truth? Because this time appearances will be stripped away, and reality will show no mercy. Stay tuned, because what's coming next will change everything you thought you knew, and make you wonder, what would you do if the person you scorned has a world you never imagined? Would you be able to regret it, or would you remain blinded by what you think you deserve? The clock keeps ticking, and in this story, every second counts. Don't miss even a moment, because the truth is waiting for you just around the corner, with the gleam of a car that may be much more than a simple luxury. It's the key to understanding what really happened, and why some people hide something inside that goes far beyond what they show the world. So here I am telling you this, because I know at some point we've all judged without knowing, and believe me, it's not easy when reality hits just as you've decided to leave. But sometimes, regret shows up when you least expect it. When a luxury car pulls up without warning, and a past you thought was closed comes back to remind you that appearances deceive more than you can imagine. Don't go, because what's coming isn't just a story of lost love and regret, but a journey to understand that we all have layers, secrets, and above all, a worth that can't be measured by money. Do you want to know how this story ends? Then come with me a little further. And together we'll discover why, sometimes, leaving isn't what it seems. And regretting can be just the first step to understanding what really matters, because the truth, even if it hurts, always finds a way to come to light. Is this really all you have? His voice sounded cold, sharp. As he looked around the modest apartment with contempt, she lowered her eyes, absent-mindedly flipping through some pages in her notebook, trying not to let her gaze reveal how she felt. He turned, heading straight for the door. His expensive jacket barely brushed against the faded walls, the contrast impossible to ignore. "You deserve something better," he said with a crooked smile. She knew that in that something better there was no place for her, not as long as she couldn't fill the emptiness in his wallet. That afternoon, it seemed the story was clear. He, the confident upper-class man. She, a simple girl with dreams but no money. She perhaps unattainable for him, a discordant note in his perfect symphony. But what happens when the truth is not what it seems? When beneath a modest appearance lies a mystery that neither he nor anyone else could have expected. She didn't say anything. She just stood up, grabbed her things, and opened the door. He watched the scene, convinced he was delivering the final blow, finishing with that phase. But just as she crossed the curb to leave, a car appeared slowly at the edge of the street. It was a black Mercedes, shining under the light filtering through the clouds. The doors opened with a soft mechanical sound that broke the heavy silence. She looked at the vehicle with a calmness that left him completely unsettled. Her face lit up, not with sadness or regret, but with a glow he had never seen before. When the door closed behind her and the car drove away, it was at that moment he realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had disregarded someone who had always been a step ahead. Can you imagine what would happen if someone who underestimates their partner discovers that she was never what she seemed? That those modest dreams were, in truth, the disguise of a life even he had never dared to dream of? What do we learn when we face appearances and the truth hidden beneath them? This is a story that shows how arrogance blinds us and how sometimes reality has a cruel irony with which to teach us someone's true worth. Because sometimes gold is hidden under the humblest layer, and the one who should value it ends up losing everything. Now that you're left wondering what happened next, let's start from the beginning, to understand how someone can come to believe that money defines a person's value, and how a single decision can change everything. Luis was a young man with an air of superiority. He had grown up surrounded by privilege, confident that his social status was a direct ticket to happiness and recognition. He had a group of friends with whom he shared laughter, cars, parties, and many material things that he thought were unattainable for others. For him, a relationship had to reflect that level. Glamorous, impressive, with someone who could orbit at his altitude. Carla, on the other hand, was discreet. She didn't care about labels or appearances. She worked 2 jobs, one in a cafe and another in a bookstore, to pay for her studies. The idea of spending a fortune on clothes or going to expensive places wasn't on her list of priorities. Her biggest dreams were to finish college and someday find a job where she could excel and feel proud. They met at university. He saw her one day in the library, surrounded by books, with a shy smile and a way about her that sparked his curiosity. At first, the attraction was purely physical. She was simple, yes, but different from the girls he usually knew. On their first dates, Carla was more interested in talking about her plans than flaunting an expensive dress. Luis, surprised by how genuine she was, thought she might be a challenge for his social circle. But he never thought their differences would become a problem. At first, he liked to show her off proudly at gatherings with his friends. "This is Carla," he would say with a mixture of affection and exoticism, as if showing off a new trophy. But soon, his appreciation began to fade. Luis started to notice every detail he thought was out of place. The modest backpack, how she would ask for a simple coffee instead of a trendy frappe, how she never accepted expensive gifts. One afternoon, as they walked downtown, he sarcastically mentioned having something better. Carla ignored him at first, trying not to let it get to her. But the mockery didn't stop. "You know, I don't understand how you put up with being with someone who can hardly treat you to anything," Louise blurted out to her. With that mix of arrogance and disdain that was already starting to weigh on her, Carla pressed her lips together but decided not to argue. She walked away from him, lost in a mix of sadness and disappointment. She knew that phrase wasn't just a comment. It was a verdict. The following weeks were tense. Luis became more distant, avoided making plans with her, and his messages shrank to curt words. Reality was becoming clear. Luis's wealth couldn't withstand Carla's humble circumstances. For his ego, that was unacceptable. One afternoon, the breakup came in the coldest way. Luis asked her to meet at a cafe where everything had started. His words, measured and direct, hit Carla like a dagger. "I don't want to be with you if you can't keep up." That was the phrase he used to say goodbye without looking back. Carla, devastated, left without saying a word, leaving behind months of hopes and broken promises. But this is where the story changes. Because what seemed like a definitive ending was just the beginning of the unexpected. She walked aimlessly, with no desire to face what felt like a personal defeat. Her broken pride and shattered heart led her to an unknown corner of the city. People glanced at her, unaware of the storm raging inside. Then in the midst of that sadness, the Mercedes appeared. Its lit-up windows like a refuge. The door opened, and from inside, a sure yet gentle voice called her by name. Carla smiled, got in, and closed the door, leaving behind not only Luis, but also that past of limitations. What Luis didn't know was that Carla harbored more secrets than her simple appearance let on. That humble girl was an heiress to a financial empire, a woman used to testing life through effort, to discover what was truly valuable. Her decision to spend those years being normal wasn't born of poverty, but of a deep search to understand the true meaning of success. She wanted to know the real world, without the shield of money. The car drove away, and with it, Luis's story became a bitter memory. He had looked down on the very person he should never have underestimated, the one who was always a step ahead, waiting for him to realize it. And you, what would you do if the person you thought you knew showed you a world you never imagined? This story doesn't end here. It has only just begun to reveal the truth behind appearances. When someone judges you only by what you seem to have or not have, there's always the chance they're losing so much more. Don't change the video, because what's coming next will surprise you even more. The real story is just beginning to unfold, just when he thought he had won, that he had finally freed himself from the burden of being with someone who had not a cent to their name. The scene took a turn neither of them could have foreseen. He, with a mocking smile and chest puffed up by his false sense of superiority, had no idea what he was about to discover. She, the girl he had carelessly discarded, her soul shattered and her heart throbbing with a bittersweet mix of sadness and defiance, gazed out at the street with eyes that seemed to search for a sign, a glimmer of hope. There, amid the cold and the indifference he had shown her, an unmistakable sound bursts forth, the soft purr of an engine approaching, elegant, powerful. A luxury car that had nothing to do with the poverty he had so proudly used as an excuse to leave her. What was happening? Who was she, really? Suddenly, every insult he had uttered became an invisible chain clenching around his throat. The question whispered by the wind, and now impossible for him to ignore, how could he have been so wrong? From the very first moment he had seen her, he felt something different. It wasn't just her natural beauty or that candid smile that lit up the dark avenues of his neighborhood. There was something about her, a subtle glow, a mystery that seemed to hide behind her modest clothes and rough hands. But he never stopped to look deeper. His gaze was blinded by ambition, by a deeply rooted and superficial idea that love should be measured in bills and bank accounts. So, with an inflated ego and ignorance on full display, he decided he deserved more, convinced himself he could get something better. And in that thought, he made his greatest mistake. But that night, as the smoke balloon of his arrogance began to deflate. Fate placed a truth on the table that he was not ready to face. She waited a few seconds, pretending not to care about the rejection, as the engine grew stronger, closer. Before his eyes appeared a black sedan, gleaming beneath the streetlights, its doors opening with the kind of elegance seen in a luxury film scene. The woman he thought he knew was far from being the penniless young woman he had so cruelly discarded. She got in unhurriedly, without nervousness, with a confidence he had never even imagined. And as the car started and its lights faded into the night, he stood there, paralyzed, feeling each pill of his pride turn to pure bitterness. Who was waiting for her? What life did she lead in secret? Why had she never told him? His mind began to spiral. Had he really been so blind that he had missed the signs? The calls she answered quickly, the messages she would hide when he appeared, the times she would disappear without warning. Now everything seemed to fit together, like a puzzle hidden for months. But more painful than all that was knowing that his mockery had wounded something much deeper than money. Because it seemed she not only had material wealth, but a world of her own, one he had rejected without ever even entering. And as he was left empty, thinking about all that he had lost for not knowing how to see, the shadow of doubt made itself at home in his chest. Could she ever forgive him? Or was it already too late? The silence that followed was dense, weighing on him like a slab. The night softly swallowed up the figure of that woman he now realized he had never truly known. He was left alone with a bitter lesson that would haunt him long after the echo of the engine faded away. A lesson about the real value of people, about how dangerous it is to be led by appearances without ever seeing deeper. And as that luxury car's door disappeared into the distance, he realized that the story had only just begun. But this time, the game had changed hands. What would he do now? Would he be stuck in guilt, or would he try to recover what he'd lost? Because sometimes it is in the pain of a goodbye that true learning is born, and the possibility of a new beginning. In that instant, under the soft glow of the streetlight, he understood that her story was so much more than her empty wallet or worn-out clothes. It was a life of secrets, of silent battles, and above all, of hidden dreams he had never seen because he was too busy wanting to show off. Now, unknowingly, he was the one left in poverty, impoverished in understanding, in respect, and in sincere love. Meanwhile, she left not just in a car he could never catch, but into a world he had failed to value, and which would now remain impenetrable to him. Fate laughed with a cruel irony, reminding him that not everything that glitters is money, and that sometimes the most valuable treasure is right in front of you, disguised in humility. The night went on, whispering voices of what could have been but wasn't, as he stood in silence, watching the distant point where the car disappeared. One persistent question haunted him. What kind of person lets their ego guide them to the point of losing something they never should have lost? That question hurt more than any blow, because he knew the answer would have to be found in his own reflection. And in that search, an uncomfortable spark began to grow, the awareness that life is far more complex and surprising than any simple economic label can contain. Then, in the mix of anger and regret, he saw something he never expected, a steady gaze, a composure that simply said she didn't need someone who had scorned her to move forward, because dignity cannot be bought or sold. And in that moment, it became clear who truly had control of the story. He, once so sure of his power of choice, was now just a secondary character in the story of someone who had known how to shine even in darkness. And so, in that night that seemed destined for more wounds, a seed of change was planted. Not for him, not yet, but for those who understand that appearances deceive, that respect is the foundation of every relationship, and that the most valuable things are always found where you least expect them. This is a story just beginning to reveal its secrets, inviting us to look more closely, to question those certainties that sometimes blind us, and to discover that sometimes losing is the only way to understand what truly matters. But what will happen next? Will he learn this lesson before it is too late? Or will the distance between them grow until it's unbridgeable? The answer, as in every good story, lies in the details that remain untold, in the silences still waiting to be filled, and in the second chances that, sometimes, just sometimes, life offers us when we least expect it. Do you know what it's like to feel that someone is beneath you, that they don't even deserve one more minute of your time? That's what happened to Diego with Carla, and he didn't hesitate to show it. But what he never imagined was that what he saw was just a fraction of the truth. And when he left Carla, what appeared before his eyes changed everything. Diego walked quickly, hands in his pockets and his jaw clenched. Next to him, Carla tried to keep up, her voice trembling as she said, "Please, Diego, it's not what you think." But he didn't even turn around. Everything about that moment was heartbreaking, because he thought he deserved something better, someone who belonged to a brighter world, a more privileged, more everything in silver world. Carla wore an old jacket, shoes that looked worn, and a simple handbag. For Diego, that was proof enough, nothing more. There was no room for what was behind that appearance. He was cruel and direct. "I can't be with someone who can't even afford a decent dinner," he blurted out without a filter. And his words fell like a hammer on Carla, who could barely bite her lip to keep from crying. But just at that moment, when Diego was already turning his back once and for all, a different noise broke the silence. The sound of a well-maintained engine, an elegant car, one of those you only see in the movies. A black SUV appeared at the corner, stirring up the crisp autumn leaves. That was when Carla straightened up and, without looking at him, opened the door of the luxury vehicle. A flawless man stepped out, dressed in an expensive suit, but with a kind gaze full of respect. Diego felt the world collapse beneath him. That didn't fit with the cheap, poor image he had painted in his mind. Who was that man? How could Carla have something like that? In that moment, every second he'd spent criticizing and judging her became an unbearable weight. The SUV picked her up, and as it drove away, Diego remained there, paralyzed, wondering if he had ever really known the real Carla, or if he had simply wanted to believe his own lie in order not to face what truly mattered. What would happen now? Could he recover something, or had he lost it forever? The story was only just beginning to show its first major twist. When genuine love clashes with superficiality, the revelations not only change the story, but also the lives of those who live it. And this is the tale of how contempt for appearances leads to the greatest loss. Don't stop following the story, because what's coming is the real test of how much we know the people we love, and whether someone's worth lies in their money or in their essence. Diego couldn't stop staring at the trail left by the car. His mind was racing a mile a minute. He remembered how Carla had always been reserved about her past, but he thought it was out of shyness, not because she was hiding such a big truth. He thought of all the times he'd criticized her, of all the words he'd let slip like daggers. What if, in the end, he was the one who wasn't good enough? As the SUV disappeared down the streets, he felt his world crumble, not just because he'd lost Carla, but because he'd lost the chance to truly know her. He stood on the sidewalk, accompanied only by the cold and his own regrets, which were beginning to make themselves loudly present. Night drew its curtains, and for Diego, time seemed to stop in that instant when the truth hit him harder than his ego ever could. The next day, Diego tried to find her. His messages went unanswered, and only one question kept spinning in his mind. What secret had Carla kept from him that had led to such judgment and abandonment? Meanwhile, Carla was someplace else. Nothing Diego thought was true, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. The woman he'd left behind was someone who had learned to fight against prejudice and to protect her world in her own way, different and strong. But the reflection in that luxury car was no accident. It was part of a life Diego had never taken the time to know. Seconds turned to hours, and Diego began to realize that sometimes we lose the best simply because we only look at the surface. That car, that arrival, was more than a movie scene. It was a sign that reality always has more layers than we imagine. And now, the story is in your hands, because what's coming is the battle between regret and courage, between what's lost and what can still be recovered, or maybe between who we think we are and who we really are when no one's watching. Don't change the video, because this story won't just make you question your prejudices, but will also teach you that true wealth isn't in what's shown, but in what's hidden behind every silent look and every silence broken only by the truth of the soul. What would you do in Diego's place? Would you stick with your first impression, or would you dig deeper, seeking to know the true value of the person by your side? The answer awaits in the next episode, where it all takes an unexpected turn, and until the end, no one will be who they seem. Because in the end, this is a story about what we leave behind, and what we never get the chance to recover. But above all, about how a luxury car can change everything in a second and allow someone to raise the voice of their dignity. Are you ready to find out what happened next? Because what now seems like an ending is actually just the opening to something much deeper. So don't go away. Come back soon, and remember, people are worth so much more than what their pocket shows. And that's something neither Diego nor anyone else can forget without paying a price. The story continues. And believe me, what comes next isn't what you expect. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. There she was, standing at the edge of the street with that calm expression that had always seemed so sweet and simple to him. But at that very moment something changed. He, with a furrowed brow and a mix of mockery and pride on his face, had already decided, this isn't for me. No matter how much his heart screamed that he was wrong, his mind was full of another idea. I deserve someone better, he muttered, without realizing that those words were the prelude to pain and regret. Ever since they had started going out, he had noticed that she never wore expensive clothes or talked about luxury. She always carried that old backpack. Her shoes showed signs of wear, and they never went to fancy places. He wanted more, wanted to shine in front of his friends, wanted to show off. But there she was, giving everything without asking for anything, with a smile that never faded. Poverty for him became a wall he couldn't cross. And on an ordinary day, under the illusion of an impossible change, he despised her. He left her alone, offering no explanation to ease the pain, throwing out harsh words like knives in the middle of the park where they had met. He thought she simply had no future, that she wasn't worth his time. But just as he was leaving, showing off his victory, something caught his attention. A luxury car, gleaming under the afternoon sun, stopped in front of her. Out stepped a well-dressed man, who looked at her with a fondness and respect that no stranger could fake. She got in calmly, unhurried, without looking back. What he didn't know was that that image would forever shatter all his certainties. But let's start from the beginning, to understand why he acted like that, and how it all came to this point. For that, we need to know Alberto, a 25-year-old guy who always had a very clear sense of what he wanted: success, money, and recognition. He grew up in a modest neighborhood but had big ambitions. Her name was Mariana, a young woman with a sweet smile who never acted rich or poor. She was simply herself, working hard and dreaming quietly. At first, everything between them was so simple and natural. Alberto was drawn to her because she was different, authentic. Mariana didn't need to dress to impress. Her joy was infectious. But over time, social pressure began to infiltrate the relationship. The words of his friends, the comments about being with someone with a future and not wasting time on someone who doesn't add up, began to take root in Alberto. And so, almost unconsciously, the seed of disdain began to grow inside him. Mariana noticed the change, but preferred to keep her feelings to herself so as not to ruin what they had. Meanwhile, Alberto convinced himself that he deserved more, that life was a stage where he had to shine and that she was only holding him back. So he began to criticize her, to mock her old shoes, her outdated phone, even her friends. All just to have a reason. an excuse to put distance between them. One day, he decided it was time to talk. He did it in the very place where they had met, under the sky that had once witnessed their laughter. Looking her in the eyes, with a coldness no lover should ever have, he told her they couldn't be together anymore. That he wanted something better, someone with whom he could share his future, not someone who seemed trapped in the past. She took a deep breath, without tears, without screams. Just a calmness he couldn't understand. And then, with a steady voice, she told him life wasn't how he thought it was. That appearances deceive, that not everything that glitters is gold, and that sometimes true value hides where you least expect it. Then, at that moment, that luxury car appeared. The sound of the engine interrupted the conversation, stealing all the attention. Alberto was paralyzed, his heart leaping with disbelief. From that car stepped out a well-dressed man, and then a woman who, without a doubt, was Mariana, but different. A woman who had left behind her worn clothes and old backpack to reveal a natural elegance, not hiding or changing it, but expressing her true essence. What did all this mean? Why had he been so blind for so long? The question echoed in his mind as he watched her leave without looking back, while he was left alone with an emptiness he didn't know how to fill. Because what he had despised was not real poverty, but the truth hidden beneath a layer of humility. This unexpected turn opens a door to so many questions. Who was Mariana really? Why had she never told him her true story? And what was going to happen now with Alberto, who would have to face the reflection of his own mistake? The story is just beginning, and the answers are yet to come. Get ready, because what happens next will challenge everything you thought you knew about love, pride, and what is truly worthwhile. He thought he had it all figured out. He believed he deserved something better, someone who shone with a lifestyle he considered worthy of him. He couldn't understand why he was still with her, a girl who seemed to live on the edge of poverty, who dressed simply and had a modest job. In his mind, she was just a burden, someone holding him back from what he called success. So one day, without warning, he decided to end the relationship. He wanted to be free, to leave behind that weight that reminded him of everything he didn't have. But according to him, she couldn't offer either. He mocked her, left her alone to face her limited reality, and walked away without looking back. But what happened in that instant changed his perspective completely. She was there, on the other side of the street, her head down, showing not a hint of resentment. The boy felt a little triumphant, as if he had won an invisible battle. But just as she began to walk away, a car appeared out of nowhere. It wasn't just any car. It was a luxury car, shiny, imposing, the kind you see in movies or in millionaire magazines. The driver rolled down the window and waved to her as if he'd known her forever. The girl smiled. Something in that moment chilled the boy to the bone, a coldness that ran down his spine and anchored in his heart. That image didn't match the poor girl he had just despised. Who was she, really? Why hadn't anyone told him that beyond that humble facade, another world existed? As the car drove off, with her settling into the front seat, the boy stood on the sidewalk, incredulous, wondering if everything he'd believed until that moment had just been an illusion. He clung to the idea that she had played him, that it was some kind of silent revenge. But deep down, he didn't even know what to think. His mockery had turned against him, and the weight of his spiteful words began to crush him. That day he learned a lesson no one had ever taught him, that not everything is what it seems. That sometimes appearances can be a barrier that blinds even the most confident eyes. As he walked, trying to erase the scene from his mind, the echo of his own prejudices rang louder than ever. And as she disappeared behind that armored door, he realized something even more disturbing. Maybe he had never been worthy of her, and that the real question was, what had he lost?